What if the advice you have heard about surviving a narcissist has been missing the most important part? We are often told that the answer is to become stronger, more confident, more intelligent, or more difficult to manipulate. But what if the people who appear strongest are sometimes the ones who remain caught in the cycle the longest? And what if the person who truly breaks free is not necessarily the loudest, toughest, or most confrontational person, but the one who makes one powerful psychological change and quietly stops participating in the pattern? Narcissistic dynamics do not work like ordinary disagreements. You cannot always reason your way through them. Explain yourself until you are understood, or argue until the truth finally wins. In many cases, every argument simply creates another opening for control. The more you defend yourself, prove your intentions, correct every accusation, or demand accountability, the more emotional energy you continue giving to the same unhealthy dynamic. This is why intelligent, capable, compassionate, and confident people can remain emotionally trapped for years. Their strengths are not the problem. The problem is where those strengths are being directed. They may spend their intelligence analyzing every conversation, their kindness trying to repair everything, and their confidence trying to convince themselves that they can finally make the relationship work. Eventually, they realize they have been using their strength to solve a problem that was never theirs to solve. Real recovery begins when the goal changes. Instead of trying to win the next argument, expose every contradiction, or force the other person to admit what they have done, they begin protecting their own peace. They stop asking, "How can I make this person understand me?" and start asking, "Why am I giving so much of myself to someone who repeatedly chooses not to understand?" That question creates a completely different direction. It moves the focus away from controlling another person and brings it back to the one place where genuine change is possible: yourself. One of the biggest misconceptions about recovering from narcissistic abuse is that you have to become emotionally stronger than the narcissist. You might believe you need thicker skin, better arguments, sharper boundaries, or enough confidence to finally overpower their tactics. Those things can help, but they are not the deepest answer. The real turning point is emotional detachment. Detachment does not mean becoming heartless. It does not mean losing your ability to care, love, forgive, or connect with people. It means that another person's behavior no longer has the power to determine your emotional state. When your peace depends on whether they are affectionate today, distant tomorrow, apologetic next week, or critical the moment after that, they still have access to your inner world. The cycle can continue through praise, rejection, guilt, silence, confusion, promises, or sudden affection because each emotional reaction keeps you psychologically engaged. You may tell yourself that you are only trying to get answers, obtain closure, or finally make them recognize your worth. But underneath all of that can be an exhausting hope that the person will eventually become who you needed them to be. Recovery starts becoming possible when you stop building your future around that possibility. You begin accepting what their repeated behavior has already shown you instead of remaining attached to what they occasionally promise. You no longer need every contradiction explained. You no longer need every accusation corrected. You no longer need their apology before allowing yourself to heal. Your attention gradually returns to your own life, your own values, your own decisions, and your own emotional stability. That is when their ability to disturb your peace begins to weaken. You are no longer trying to defeat them. You are simply refusing to let their behavior define you. And this is the shift that many people do not recognize until they have already spent years exhausted by the cycle. Freedom does not always arrive through one dramatic confrontation or one perfect final conversation. Sometimes it begins with something much quieter. You stop participating. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing clarity from someone who repeatedly creates confusion. You stop trying to prove that your feelings are legitimate. You stop measuring your worth by whether they approve of you, miss you, regret losing you, or finally recognize what they did. Instead, you begin noticing how much energy was being consumed by the constant need to respond. Every message no longer requires an immediate answer. Every accusation no longer requires a defense. Every emotional shift no longer needs to become your emotional shift. This is where real distance begins, even before physical distance is possible. And for someone who has spent a long time emotionally attached to a narcissistic dynamic, that can feel strange at first. You may still miss them. You may still question yourself. You may still remember the good moments and wonder whether things could have been different. None of that means you are failing. Healing is not the absence of memories or emotions, it is the gradual loss of their power over your choices. You begin choosing peace even when chaos is familiar. You begin trusting patterns instead of promises. You begin understanding that kindness does not require unlimited access, intelligence does not require endless analysis, and confidence does not require proving yourself to someone determined to challenge your worth. The person who truly walks away is not necessarily the person who never cared. Often, it is the person who finally realizes that caring about someone does not mean abandoning themselves. That realization changes everything. It is the moment survival begins transforming into recovery, and recovery begins transforming into freedom. You eventually stop waiting for the apology that may never be offered with genuine sincerity, and you stop hoping for the sudden moment of empathy that always seems to remain just beyond your reach. Your sense of worth is no longer determined by whether this person praises you, ignores you, criticizes you, or suddenly becomes affectionate. Instead, you begin looking inward and asking whether the life you are living reflects your own values, standards, and emotional well being. Their approval may still feel good, but it no longer defines you. Their criticism may still sting, but it no longer has the authority to tell you who you are. This change usually happens quietly. It is not one dramatic moment where everything suddenly disappears. There may still be difficult days when you question yourself, remember old conversations, or feel tempted to return to familiar patterns. You might replay something they said and wonder whether you should have responded differently. You may even find yourself searching for explanations long after the relationship has ended. But gradually, those emotional attachments begin losing their strength because you are no longer giving them your attention every hour of every day. The mental space once occupied by analyzing their behavior starts becoming available for something healthier. You reconnect with people who make you feel safe. You invest energy in meaningful work, personal development, hobbies, goals, and relationships where mutual respect actually exists. Slowly, your life begins expanding beyond the person who once seemed to occupy so much of your mind. That is a major sign of recovery. You are no longer organizing your identity around what happened to you. You are beginning to organize your future around what you want to create. Their reactions become information rather than instructions. Their moods become their responsibility rather than your emergency. And your decisions begin coming from self respect instead of fear. This is where the emotional grip starts breaking because you are no longer allowing someone else's behavior to become the center around which your entire life revolves. Many people spend an enormous amount of time believing that freedom will come once they discover the perfect words. They imagine that if they could explain the situation clearly enough, present enough evidence, remember every detail, or calmly describe exactly how they were hurt, the other person would finally understand. They replay imaginary conversations in their heads and prepare responses to arguments that may never even happen. They collect examples, screenshots, memories, and explanations because they are searching for the one piece of information that will make everything undeniable. But this can become another trap. The problem is often not that the other person lacks information. They may understand exactly what happened and still choose to deny it, minimize it, reinterpret it, or redirect the blame. When protecting their image or maintaining control becomes more important than honest accountability, even the most reasonable explanation may not produce the response you are hoping for. This is why recovery requires moving away from endless persuasion and toward clear personal boundaries. A boundary is not a command designed to force another person to behave differently. It is a decision about what you will do when a certain behavior occurs. Instead of repeatedly saying, "You need to stop disrespecting me," you might decide, "If this conversation becomes disrespectful, I will leave the conversation." That distinction is powerful because your boundary depends on your behavior, not on their cooperation. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. The other person may call you selfish, cold, dramatic, unreasonable, or difficult simply because you are no longer responding in the way they expect. They may push against your limits to see whether you truly mean what you said. This is where consistency becomes more important than confrontation. You do not need the perfect comeback. You do not need to win the argument. You need to follow through on the decisions you made to protect yourself. Every time you respect your own boundary, you send yourself a message that your needs matter. With repetition, that builds self trust. And as self trust becomes stronger, the old pattern of manipulation becomes harder to maintain because you are no longer abandoning yourself just to keep the other person comfortable. There is another part of recovery that people often overlook because they focus almost entirely on thoughts, emotions, and psychological understanding. Your body can also carry the effects of prolonged emotional instability. When you spend a long time around unpredictable reactions, criticism, manipulation, tension, or constant emotional uncertainty, your nervous system may begin operating as though danger is always nearby. You might become unusually alert to changes in someone's voice, facial expression, texting style, or mood. A simple message can make your stomach tighten because your mind immediately starts wondering what it means. A phone notification can create anxiety before you have even read it. Someone raising their voice may cause your entire body to tense because your system has learned to associate that sound with conflict. These responses are not proof that you are weak or incapable of handling life. They can be signs that your body has spent too long preparing for the next emotional disturbance. When the nervous system remains in that state for an extended period, ordinary life can become surprisingly exhausting. You may find it difficult to concentrate, make decisions, relax, or enjoy things that once felt natural. You may constantly review your choices because you have become accustomed to questioning whether you did something wrong. Even after sleeping, you can wake up feeling mentally drained because rest does not automatically erase accumulated stress. This is why genuine recovery involves more than simply understanding narcissistic behavior. You also need to rebuild a sense of safety within your own daily life. Calm routines, supportive relationships, healthy distance, rest, and consistent self care can gradually teach your system that it no longer has to remain prepared for the next emotional attack. The goal is not simply to become better at surviving chaos. The deeper goal is to create a life where your mind and body no longer have to organize themselves around chaos at all. Many people coming out of prolonged emotional manipulation mistakenly assume that something is wrong with them because they no longer feel as confident, focused, or capable as they once did. But often, the problem is not that their abilities disappeared. Their mind and body have simply been functioning under stress for far too long. When you spend enough time anticipating criticism, conflict, emotional shifts, or unpredictable reactions, your brain naturally begins prioritizing protection over creativity, confidence, and clear thinking. Healing starts when your system repeatedly experiences something it may have been missing for a very long time: genuine safety. Simple things can matter more than people realize. A predictable daily routine, enough sleep, regular physical movement, supportive people, quiet moments, and environments where you do not have to constantly monitor another person's mood can gradually remind your nervous system that life does not always require defense. As that sense of safety becomes more familiar, your mind begins to settle. You may notice that decisions become easier, emotions feel less overwhelming, and your confidence starts returning without you having to force it. You become capable of pausing instead of immediately reacting. You can look at a situation, separate facts from fear, and decide what response actually reflects your values. That pause is incredibly important because manipulation often trains people to react before they have time to think. Recovery gives that space back to you. You begin realizing that you do not have to respond instantly to every accusation, every message, every change in tone, or every attempt to pull you into an emotional argument. You can breathe, observe, and choose. If this message is helping you understand your own experience in a different way, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Narcissist Recovery. These conversations are meant to help you recognize unhealthy patterns, rebuild your sense of self, and understand what healthier emotional relationships can look like. Sharing and supporting this kind of content can also help someone who may still be struggling to understand what they are experiencing. Another deeply exhausting pattern is the belief that if you could only explain yourself perfectly, everything would finally become clear. You carefully choose your words, replay conversations, provide examples, clarify your intentions, and repeatedly explain what you actually meant. You may spend hours thinking about how to phrase something so there is absolutely no possibility of misunderstanding. But eventually, you begin to recognize that the problem may never have been a lack of clarity. Someone can understand your words and still deliberately reinterpret them. They can know your intentions and still describe them differently if that version allows them to maintain control, avoid accountability, or protect the image they want others to believe. Once you understand this, something important changes inside you. You stop treating every accusation as a challenge that must be answered. You stop feeling responsible for correcting every inaccurate story. You stop believing that your worth depends on convincing another person that you are a good, honest, reasonable, or caring individual. Because when you spend your life trying to prove yourself to someone determined to question you, there is no finish line. Each explanation creates the need for another explanation. Each clarification can become another argument. Eventually, you are spending more energy managing their opinion of you than actually living your own life. Your goals become secondary, your friendships become secondary, your peace becomes secondary. The constant need to defend yourself takes up the space where your real life should be happening. People who begin recovering eventually understand that being misunderstood by someone who has no genuine interest in understanding them is not evidence that they failed to communicate. They allow their behavior, values, and consistency to speak for themselves. They realize that silence can sometimes be healthier than another explanation, and that refusing to participate in an unwinnable argument is not weakness. It is a decision to stop wasting emotional energy on a battle that was never designed to have a fair outcome. Every time you release the need to prove yourself, you take back a little more of the life that was being consumed by the struggle. And perhaps the most painful thing that can disappear inside a narcissistic relationship is not simply time, opportunities, or even the relationship itself. It is your connection to who you were before you became focused on surviving it. This usually happens so slowly that you may not recognize it while it is happening. You stop mentioning certain opinions because you already know they will lead to criticism. You avoid activities you once enjoyed because they are mocked, dismissed, or treated as unimportant. You become careful about what you wear, what you say, where you go, who you speak to, and even what makes you happy, because almost anything can become a source of conflict. At first, these compromises may seem small. You tell yourself that avoiding one argument is easier. You give up one preference to keep the peace. You stay quiet about one subject because you do not want another confrontation. But thousands of small compromises can eventually create a life that no longer feels like yours. Without realizing it, you begin organizing your choices around another person's emotional reactions. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will keep things calm?" That is the point where survival can begin replacing authenticity. Your decisions are no longer guided primarily by your interests, beliefs, or dreams. They are shaped by the desire to avoid criticism, rejection, anger, withdrawal, or emotional punishment. Eventually, you may look at your own life and feel strangely disconnected from it. You may not even know what you genuinely enjoy anymore because so much of your attention has been spent adapting to someone else. Recovery, therefore, involves more than leaving an unhealthy dynamic. It involves meeting yourself again. You begin with small choices. Choose the music you actually like, return to an activity you abandon. Reconnect with someone who makes you feel like yourself. Express an opinion without immediately apologizing for having one. Make a decision because it feels right to you, not because it will keep someone else satisfied. Each choice may seem insignificant, but together they rebuild something powerful: your identity. And little by little, you stop merely surviving someone else's emotional world and begin creating your own again. Rebuilding yourself often begins through very ordinary choices that may seem insignificant at first. You start making decisions without checking whether someone else approves of them. You reach out to people who genuinely support you instead of isolating yourself to avoid conflict. You return to interests you abandoned because they were criticized, dismissed, or made difficult to enjoy. You also begin allowing yourself to have thoughts, emotions, preferences, and opinions without immediately feeling guilty for having them. Every time you choose according to your own values, you reinforce a powerful realization. Your life was never meant to revolve around another person's emotional demands. Confidence slowly returns because it is no longer something you receive from someone else's praise. It becomes something you build internally through repeated acts of self respect. You begin trusting your judgment because you see yourself making decisions and standing behind them. You begin trusting your voice because you allow yourself to speak without constantly editing everything to prevent someone else's reaction. And you begin trusting your instincts because you no longer automatically dismiss what you feel simply because another person tells you that your perception is wrong. This process may feel unfamiliar in the beginning because you have spent so long adapting. But with every small decision, you become more connected to yourself. You discover that confidence is not about always feeling certain. It is about knowing that even when you make a mistake, you can handle the consequences without abandoning yourself. You no longer need another person's approval to validate your existence. Your choices become yours again, your interests become yours again, and even your emotional world begins to feel like a place you are allowed to inhabit freely. That is how self-trust is rebuilt. Not through one dramatic transformation, but through hundreds of small moments where you choose yourself without guilt. One of the most difficult lessons after narcissistic abuse is realizing that hope can sometimes keep the cycle alive. This does not mean hope itself is harmful. The problem is the specific kind of hope that keeps you waiting for someone to suddenly become the person you always wanted them to be. You may keep believing that one day they will finally understand how deeply they hurt you, accept responsibility, show genuine empathy, and make lasting changes. That belief can survive even after disappointment has happened again and again. Sometimes all it takes is a kind conversation, a sincere sounding promise, a period of unusual calm, or a temporary improvement to make you think that perhaps everything is finally changing. Those moments can create a powerful illusion that lasting transformation is just one step away, even when the larger pattern remains exactly the same. Acceptance does not mean saying that harmful behavior was acceptable. It does not mean forgetting what happened or giving up on your own future. Acceptance simply means being willing to see reality without constantly replacing it with the version you wish were true. You begin looking at patterns instead of isolated moments. You pay attention to repeated behavior instead of allowing one emotional conversation to erase months or years of evidence. Instead of asking, what if they finally change? You start asking, what has their behavior consistently shown me? That question brings you out of possibility and back into reality. As that clarity grows, you no longer need to analyze every conversation for hidden meanings or interpret every temporary improvement as proof that a permanent transformation is coming. Your decisions become grounded in what you can actually observe. You stop building your future around someone's potential and start building it around your own emotional safety, values, goals, and well-being. That creates room for relationships where consistency matters, respect is mutual, communication is safer, and you are not constantly waiting for the next disappointment. The person who moves beyond narcissistic abuse is not necessarily the most intelligent, successful, attractive, confident, or emotionally tough person in the room. It is the person who develops emotional independence. Emotional independence means your sense of value is no longer controlled by another person's approval or rejection. Their praise can be pleasant without becoming the source of your identity. Their criticism can be painful without becoming proof that something is wrong with you. Their affection can be meaningful without becoming something you desperately need in order to feel worthy. Narcissistic control becomes much weaker when you stop handing someone else the authority to determine how you see yourself. As long as another person's opinion feels like the final judgment on your value, their behavior can continue controlling your emotional world, even when they are no longer physically present.